All right, welcome guys. Today we are going to start with our welcoming ritual for our ELA virtual meetup. And today is Friday, October 30th. So first, if we were in class together, we would be doing this summary together. But since you weren't able to be there today, that's okay. And I'm glad you're watching the video. Just make sure to try to do this by yourself first. So pause the video and give me a brief summary of chapter 2. Since I'm not there with you, try to explain it to maybe a brother, a sister, your mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather, maybe even your dog, okay? Explain it to someone around you. Okay, so remember, when we are creating a summary, it's going to just be the most important parts of what took place, okay? So we could use the somebody wanted but so then, or in this case, I'm just going to talk about what happened. So we start off in the cotton field, and they're picking cotton, and Casey sees her father. Her father has brought Mr. Morrison home, and the kids aren't sure why Mr. Morrison is there, but all they know that he's there to help them and there to work, and that he got kicked out of his job, okay, for fighting. And then we also go with them to church on Sunday, and we hear that one of the berries has died, okay? So one of the berries that was burned very badly has died, and there's lots of talk about how the sheriff doesn't even care and it's getting out of hand, okay? So the white people are terrorizing black people, and we can see that the Logan family is a little bit afraid about this, but definitely everyone around them is very afraid. Okay, so that's what's happened in chapter 2. Okay, and as we start today, we are going to review figures of speech, specifically these 4 figures of speech. So go ahead and pause the video and think about these figures of speech. So what are they? Can you think of one maybe for yourself? So for example, a simile. What is a simile? And then can you create a simile? Okay, so I'm going to stop for a second and you think about simile, metaphor, personification, and onomatopoeia. Okay, so simile, let's start there. Simile is comparing two things using like or as. Okay, so her skin felt as soft as a blanket. Okay, so we use the word as, okay, to compare two things. Metaphor. A metaphor is comparing two things, but you're not going to use like or as. Okay, so for example, he ran like a cheetah. Okay, or I just used the word like, so that doesn't count. He was a cheetah. There we go. So he was a cheetah when he was running. Okay, we're just saying he was the cheetah. Okay, it's comparing him to a cheetah, but we're not using like or as. So I did mess up the first time, but we could just say he was a cheetah when he was running. Personification. Personification is when something that is not a person takes on traits that a person has. Okay, so for example, crying. Okay, so we could say the cloud erupted and it began to cry. Okay, so obviously clouds don't cry, but since we are giving it a person characteristic, it is personification. And then the last one, onomatopoeia, that is when we have a sound Okay, so when we're reading a sound, okay, and the word looks like the sound. So for example, boom, crash, okay? Those are sounds that we can show through words, okay? And the word sounds like the sound sounds like the word. All right, so we're going to start today. And there's going to be a few parts where I want you to look for any of these figures of speech. And I'm going to tell you before we start the paragraph that when we come to it, I want you to, right now you can just pause the video and tell me, okay? If we were in the live together, I would have you raise your hand. Okay, and then also, we are going to learn about a bus situation, okay? So something's going to happen with the bus. And I want you to be thinking about what Stacy does about it. Okay, so Stacy's going to do something about this bus situation. So I want you to be paying attention for what happens there. Okay, so here we go. We're going to get started once I flip to the camera. All right, picking back up at the beginning of chapter 3. By the end of October, the rain had come, falling heavily upon the 6-inch layer of dust, which had its own way for more than 2 months. At first, the rain had merely splotched the dust, which seemed to be rejoicing in its own resilience and laughing at the heavy drops thudding against it. But eventually, the dust was forced to surrender to the mastery of the rain, and it churned into a fine red mud that oozed between our toes and slopped against our ankles as we marched miserably to and from school. Okay, so I'm going to pause right there. In that first sentence, can you see any figures of speech? Hopefully you said laughing at the heavy drops thudding against it. Okay, so the dust can't laugh. Okay, so what would that be? What kind of figure of speech? It would be personification. Okay, same thing with surrendered. Okay, or surrender, excuse me. All right, we're going to keep going. To shield us from the rain, Mama issued us dry calf skins, which we flung over our heads and shoulders like stiff cloaks. We were not very fond of the skins, for once they were wet, they emitted a musty odor, which seeped into our clothing and clung to our skins. We preferred to do without them. Unfortunately, Mama cared very little about what we preferred. Since we usually left for school after Mama, we solved this problem by dutifully cloaking ourselves with the skins before leaving home. As soon as we were beyond Big Ma's eagle eyes, we threw off the cloaks and depended upon the overhanging limbs of the forest trees to keep us dry. Once at school, we donned the cloaks again and marched into the respective classrooms properly attired. If we had been faced only with the prospect of the rain soaking through our clothing each morning and evening, we could have more easily endured the journey between home and school. But as it was, we also had to worry about the Jefferson Davis school bus, zooming from behind and splashing us with the murky water of the road. Knowing that the bus driver liked to entertain his passengers by sending us slipping along the road to the almost inaccessible forest banks washed to a smooth baldness by a constant rain. We continuously looked over our shoulders when we were between the two crossroads, so that we could reach the bank before the bus was upon us. But sometimes the rain pounded so heavily that it was all we could do to stay upright, and we did not look back as often, nor listen as carefully as we should. We constantly found ourselves comical objects to cruel eyes that gave no thought to our misery. No one was more angered by this humiliation than Little Man. Although he had asked Mama after the first day of school why Jefferson Davis had 2 buses and Great Faith had none, he had never been totally satisfied by her answer. She had explained to him, as she explained to Christopher John the year before, and to me 2 years before that the county did not provide buses for its black students. In fact, she said, the county provided very little, and much of the money, which supported the black schools, came from the black churches. Great Faith Church just could not afford a bus, so therefore we had to walk. This information cut deeply into Little Man's brain, and each day when he found his clean clothes splashed red by the school bus, he became more and more embittered, until finally one day he stomped angrily into the kitchen and exploded. "They done it again, Big Ma! Just look at my clothes!" Big Ma clucked her tongue as she surveyed us. "Well, go on and out of 'em, honey, and wash 'em out. All of y'all, get out of them clothes and dry yourselves," she said, turning back to the huge iron-bellied stove to stir her stew. "But, Big Ma, it ain't fair," wailed Little Man. "It just ain't fair." Stacy and Christopher John left to change into their work clothes, but Little Man sat on the side bench looking totally dejected as he gazed at his pale blue pants crusted with mud from the knees down. Although each night Big Ma prepared a pot of hot soapy water for him to wash out his clothing, each day he arrived home looking as if his pants had not been washed in more than a month. Big Ma was not one for coddling any of us, but now she turned from the stove and, wiping her hands on her long white apron, sat down on the bench and put her arm around Little Man. "Now, look here, baby, it ain't the end of the world. Lord, child, don't you know one day the sun'll shine again and you won't get muddy no more?" "But, Big Ma," Little Man protested, "if'n that old bus driver would slow down, I wouldn't get muddy." Then he frowned deeply and added, "Or if'n we had a bus like theirs." "Well, he don't, and you don't," Big Ma said, getting up. "So ain't no frettin' about it. One day you'll have a plenty of clothes and maybe even a car of your own to ride round in. So don't you pay no mind to them ignorant white folks. You just keep on studying and keep yourself a good education and you'll be all right. Now, go on and wash out your clothes and hang 'em up by the fire so as I can iron 'em 'fore I go to bed." Turning, she spied me. "Casey, what you want, girl? Go change into your pants and hurry on back here so's you can help me to get this supper on the table time your mom gets home." That night, when I was snug in the deep feather bed beside Big Ma, the tat-tat of the rain against the tin roof changed to a deafening roar that sounded as if thousands of giant rocks were being hurled against the earth. By morning, the heavy rain had become a drizzle, but the earth was badly sodden from the night's downpour. High rivers of muddy water flowed in the deep gullies, and wide lakes shimmered on the roads. All right, so we're going to pause there. Try to pick out some more figurative language that you see. Okay, so the tat-tat, what figurative language is that? That would be an onomatopoeia, okay? So we could almost hear the tat-tat of the rain. Okay? And then it also compared the sound, the deafening roar, to giant rocks, thousands of giant rocks being flung against the earth. Okay, so there's some more that we see. As we set out for school, the whiteness of the sun attempted to penetrate the storm clouds, but by the time we had turned north toward the second crossing, it had given up, slinking meekly behind the blackening clouds. Soon the thunder rolled across the sky, and the rain fell like hail upon our bent heads. "Ah, shoot! I sure am getting tired of this mess," complained TJ. But no one else said a word. We were all listening for the bus. Although we had left home early earlier than usual to cover the northern road before the bus came. We were not overly confident that we would miss it, for we had tried this strategy before. Sometimes it worked, most times it didn't. It was as if the bus were a living thing, plaguing and defeating us at every turn. We could not outwit it. We plodded along, feeling the cold mud against our feet, walking faster and faster to reach the crossroads. Then Christopher John stopped. "Hey, y'all, I think I hear it," he warned. We looked around but saw nothing. "Ain't nothing yet," I said. We walked on. "Wait a minute," said Christopher John, stopping a second time. "There it is again." We turned, but still there was nothing. "Why don't you clean out your ears?" TJ exclaimed. "Wait," said Stacy. "I think I hear it too." We hastened up the road to where the gully was narrower, and we could easily swing up the bank into the forest. Soon the purr of a motor came closer, and Mr. Granger's sleek silver Packard eased into view. It was a grand car with chrome shining even in the rain, and the only one like it in the county, so it was said. We groaned. "Just old Harlan," said TJ flippantly, as the expensive car rounded a curve and disappeared. Then he and Claude started down the bank. Stacy stopped them. "Long as we're already up here, why don't we wait a while?" he suggested. "The bus ought to be here soon, and it'll be hard to get up on the bank further down the road." "Aw, man, that bus ain't coming for a while yet," said TJ. "We left early this morning, remember?" Stacy looked to the south, thinking. Little man, Christopher John, and I waited for his decision. "Come on, man," TJ persuaded. "Why stay up here waiting for that devilish bus when we could be at school out of this mess?" "Well," TJ and Claude jumped from the bank. Then Stacy, frowning as if he were doing this against his better judgment, jumped down too. Little man, Christopher John, and I followed. 5 minutes later, we were skidding like frightened puppies toward the bank again as the bus accelerated and barreled down the narrow, rain-soaked road. But there was no place to which we could run, for Stacy had been right. Here the gullies were too wide, filled almost to overflowing, and there were no briars or bushes by which we could swing up onto the bank. Finally, when the bus was less than 50 feet behind us, it veered dangerously close to the right edge of the road where we were running, forcing us to attempt the jump to the bank, but all of us fell short and landed in the slime of the gully. Little man, chest deep in water, scooped up a handful of mud and in an uncontrollable rage scrambled up to the road and ran after the retreating bus. As moronic rolls of laughter and cries of "Nasty, nasty mud eater" wafted from the open windows. Little man threw his mud ball, missing the wheels by several feet. Then, totally dismayed by what had happened, he buried his face in his hands and cried. TJ climbed from the gully, grinning at Little man, but Stacy, his face burning red beneath his dark skin, glared so fiercely at TJ that he fell back. "Just one word out of you, TJ," he said tightly. "Just one word." Christopher John and I looked at each other. We had never seen TJ look like this, and neither had Stacy look like this, and neither had TJ. "Hey, man, I ain't said nothing. I'm just as burnt as you are." Stacy glowered at TJ a moment longer. Then, walking swiftly to Little man, and put his long arm around his shoulder, saying softly, "Come on, man. It ain't gonna happen no more. At least not for a long while. I promise you that." Again, Christopher John and I looked questioningly at each other, wondering how Stacy could make such a rash promise. Then, shrugging, we hurried after him. When Jeremy Sims spied us from his high perch on the forest path, he ran hastily down and joined us. "Hey," he said, his face lighting into a friendly grin. But no one spoke to him. The smile faded, and noticing our mud-covered clothing, he asked, "Hey, Stacy, what happened?" Stacy turned, stared into his blue eyes, and said coldly, "Why don't you leave us alone? How come you always hang around us anyway?" Jeremy grew even more pale. "'Cause I just likes y'all," he stammered. Then he whispered, "Was it the bus again?" No one answered him, and he said no more. When we reached the crossroads, he looked hopefully at us, as if we might relent and say goodbye. But we did not relent. As I glanced back at him standing alone in the middle of the crossing, he looked as if the world itself was slung around his neck. It was only then that I realized that Jeremy never rode the bus, no matter how bad the weather. As we crossed the school lawn, Stacy beckoned Christopher John, Little Man, and me aside. "Look," he whispered, "meet me at the tool shed right at noon." "Why?" we asked. He eyed us conspiratorially. "I'll show y'all where we're going to stop that bus from splashing us." "How?" asked Little Man, eager for revenge. "Don't have time to explain now. Just meet me and be on time. It's going to take all lunch hour." You mean we ain't gonna eat no lunch?" Christopher John cried in dismay. "You can miss lunch for one day," said Stacy, moving away. But Christopher John looked sourly after him, as if greatly questioned the wisdom of the plan so drastic that it could exclude lunch. "You gonna tell TJ and Claude?" I asked. Stacy shook his head. "TJ's my best friend, but he's got no stomach for this kind of thing. He talks too much, and we couldn't include Claude without TJ." "Good," said Little Man. At noon, we met as planned and ducked into the unlocked tool shed, where all the church and school garden tools were kept. Stacy studied the tools available while the rest of us watched. Then, grabbing the only shovels, he handed one to me, holding on to the other himself, and directed Little Man and Christopher John to each take 2 buckets. Stealthily emerging from the tool shed into the drizzle, we eased along the forest edge behind the class buildings to avoid being seen. Once on the road, Stacy began to run. "Come on, hurry," he ordered. "We ain't got much time." "Where we going?" asked Christopher John, still not quite adjusted to the prospect of missing lunch. "Up to where that bus forced us off the road. Be careful now," he said to Christopher John, already puffing to keep up. When we reached the place where we had fallen into the gully, Stacy halted. "All right," he said, "start digging." Without another word, he put his bare foot upon the top of the shovel and sank it deep into the soft road. Come on," he ordered, glancing up at Christopher John, Little Man, and me, who were wondering whether he had finally gone mad. "Casey, you start digging over there on that side of the road, right across from me. That's right, don't get too near the edge. It's got to look like it's been washed out. Christopher John, you and Little Man start scooping out mud from the middle of the road. Quick now," he said, still digging, as we began to carry out his commands. "We only got about 30 minutes, so we's got to get back to school on time." We asked no more questions, while Stacy and I shoveled ragged holes almost a yard wide and a foot deep toward each other, dumping the excess mud into the water-filled gullies. Little Man and Christopher John scooped bucketfuls of red earth from the road's center, and for once in his life, Little Man was happily oblivious to the mud spattering upon him. When Stacy's and my holes merged into one big hole with Little Man's and Christopher John's, Stacy and I threw down our shovels and grabbed the extra buckets. Then the 4 of us ran back and forth to the gullies, hastily filling the buckets with the murky water and dumping it into the hole. Now, understanding Stacy's plan, we worked wordlessly until the water lay at the same level as the road. Then Stacy waded into the gully water and pulled himself upon the forest bank. Finding 3 rocks, he stacked them to identify the spot. "It might look different this afternoon," he explained, jumping down again. Christopher John looked up at the sky. Looks like it's gonna rain real hard some more." "Let's hope so," said Stacy. "The more rain, the better. That'll make it seem more likely that the road could have been washed away like that. It'll also keep cars and wagons away." He looked around, surveying the road. "And let's hope don't nothing come along for that bus. Let's go." Quickly, we gathered our buckets and shovels and hurried back to school. After returning the tools to the tool shed, we stopped at the well to wash the mud from our arms and feet, then rushed into our classes, hoping that the mud caked on our clothes would go unnoticed. All right, that's where we're going to stop today. Make sure you complete the exit ticket. Great job, guys.